Welcome to this special edition of Full Prefrontal, the Big Picture series. Coupled with our extensive library of conversations with leaders in the fields of neuroscience and cognitive, educational, and social psychology, in this special series, Sucheta plans to dive deeper into the science of executive function, including managing oneself and one's cognitive resources in order to achieve goals. Throughout the Big Picture series, we'll explore the difference between knowing and doing. She will share real-life examples and day-to-day tips for practicing intentional strategies to help you, your family, your team members, or your students build competencies in executive function to lead to stronger, more resilient relationships, sustainable communities, and fulfilling lives together. And now here is our host, Sucheta Kamath. All right, welcome back to this very special edition of the Full Prefrontal Podcast. This is our Big Picture series, a deep dive discussion about why executive function matters. So I guess today we're going to talk about innovation in education. So Sucheta, we talk a lot about executive function on this show. You have a very special place in your heart around education. So let's talk about how we marry those two together. So what I guess I want to ask you is, how should we frame our educational reach in this 21st century and look at it through the executive function lens? I mean, I guess the big question we ought to ask is, what is it going to take for students to succeed in the 21st century?
Such a great question, Todd. You rightfully said, I'm so passionate about education. I deeply care about learners, and I'm totally committed to helping learners become self-sufficient thinkers. And ideally, when educational process is completed, a student at the other end of the educational process should emerge as an individual with the capacity to develop self-devised strategic thinking. That means self-devised means I come up with these strategies for me based on my knowledge of me. This works for me. This doesn't work for me. And if I do this, it will make me more effective. Now, the true question is, are we preparing learners with that lens, and are they becoming these individuals who have great understanding of self? So before we come to that point of executive function lens, let's quickly talk about what are people or experts saying about 21st century need. And I'm an avid reader. And recently I read Tony Wagner's book, which is an old book, but I would love to make a reference here. He identified 7 characteristics of a successful learner, and he described them as the following. They are problem solvers and critical thinkers. They're able to collaborate across networks. They have this apt ability to adapt. They're able to take the initiative without any external prompt. They have effective oral and written communication. And by the way, this is my husband's favorite thing, which is he always said to my children that your grades don't matter, but make sure that you're able to communicate in writing and in speaking. Successfully be able to analyze information and stay curious and imaginative. So as you see this list of things, none of them are really talking about be good in math or, make sure you have second language proficiency. Another important person to talk about is Hannah Rosen. In her TED Talk, she kind of gave following insights that I thought were wonderfully meaningful to how I like to think about executive function preparedness. And she said that following skill set are likely to lead to success in 21st century. And what are they? Intelligence. You need intelligence, of course. And then she lists these abilities, which then also I'm going to, it's a tongue in cheek here, but these are the abilities which are more pertaining to executive function. And she lists them: that ability to sit still and focus, the ability to communicate openly, the ability to listen to people, and the ability to operate in workplace that is much more fluid than ever before. And so the term fluid here is really important that I feel we need to kind of have a conversation. So fluid to me means ever-changing. Fluid means ambiguous. And fluid means unpredictable. That means it was planned or set out to go a particular way, and there was some sort of interruption that made it not go in a particular way, calling for adaptive adjustment. Another person that comes to mind is Daniel Pink. He's one of my favorite authors. He will be on our show in a few months. His book, The Whole New Mind, Daniel Pink talks about what kind of set of skills that future generation needs. And he says that teachers need to move away from old teaching methods. They need to get training and education to develop 6 important senses to promote the right brain. And these 6 important senses is the sense of design, sense of storytelling, symphony, empathy, play, and meaning. And again, none of these are talking about academic achievement, as you can see in this list, but design is being able to understand how the elements work together visual spatially. Story is the having cohesion or bringing narrative meaning and being able to kind of frame a question by contextualizing it. And, symphony is another non-academic set of skills, which is more related to musicality, which also requires understanding of how to understand music. Empathy is understanding emotions of other people, and play is exploratory problem solving, and meaning is understanding purpose. So again, what do I see in this message? I see the need is to help children become wholesome and develop these skills and abilities that kind of help their a sense of self that is not just coming from knowledge or memorization, unidimensional thinking skills. It's multimodality thinking skills. Another expert comes to my mind is this amazing educator, Howard Gardner, and his theory of multiple intelligence. I read this article where Mindy Kohnhaber and her colleagues who are working on a project called Summit, which is schools using multiple intelligence theory. And they identified following things that really work in wholesome development of children, which is the culture that supports differentiated learning, something that focuses on teaching readiness skills, something that emphasizes on providing tools, not just knowledge, education that weaves collaboration in the curriculum, education that teaches students importance of choice for self, and a curriculum that incorporates arts. So again, multiple ways of slicing the same pie, which is how to help develop that mind, which is multifaceted, but is very engaged in understanding the purpose and meaning, even when subjects particularly may not make sense. So I really think that there's so much 21st century is asking. Somewhere I read this research where people were asked about questions about their memory, and they tended to claim that they have very good memory because they are able to access it on Google. So we are now we have these phones and technology on our fingertips. We can access any information without needing to memorize it. The question then becomes, who is successful if all can access all information? And so only those are successful who are actually having an understanding of purpose and able to tailor their behaviors to the demands that life puts on them.
Well, just listening to you go through these experts, people like Dan Pink and such, who, as you kept saying, they don't talk about being good at math or being good at taking tests. And I worry that our educational system is not set up to this way of thinking. It's fascinating here. Walk me through. What's the real bottom line here?
Yeah, so the bottom line, somewhere I read in a Learning and Innovation Skills article that there are 4 C's, which is creativity and innovation, critical thinking and problem solving, 3rd is communication, and 4th is collaboration. So bottom line is every 21st century student, in order to successfully complete education and enter the realm of lifelong learning, needs to become independent, self-motivated, self-sufficient, and self-sustaining. This student needs to be able to operate with least amount of supervision. The student needs to have knowledge about the world. And most importantly, this student needs to have insight into self. So in essence, the student that is likely to succeed in 21st century is one who receives training, support, and actual education by helping him or her develop greatest executive function skills.
Well, Sucheta, listening to you there, giving me the bottom line, you could almost insert employee where you have student. There's a lot of people struggling in the workplace because of those same problems, yes?
Oh, yeah. So imagine if your educational system, and we shouldn't really say 21st century as if this is 2000.
Right.
We are already in so much further ahead into the century, but educational system has not caught up in providing this kind of backbone in personal development yet, the way I see it. So yes, if we cranked out these individuals with greatest self-awareness and self-efficacy skills, means they have the most deepest understanding that what makes me effective, then they are going to join the workforce with these skill set and are going to be able to say that what makes me most effective at work.
So you just said our educational system has not caught up. So walk us through brass tacks. I mean, what skills are not being taught in schools today?
Oh my God, many, many skills. So before I talk about that, let me give you a quick experiment that people did. So you understand a straw, right? What does a straw do?
This is how you pull water out of a glass?
Great. So the straw typically used to drink. So
Right.
Without being gross, but you're using the suck function to bring water into your mouth or liquid into your mouth. And there is a way to reverse that function and blow through a straw.
Right.
Correct?
Yep.
So they did this experiment with young children, itty bitty children, 3 years of age. And they were given this soapy water, and the teacher uses soapy water with color added to it. So you have 3 bowls with 3 colors. Let's say you have a pink and green and then maybe red. And then you blow bubbles into this soapy water dish and then take a piece of paper, a large arts and crafts paper, and you blot it. And now you have bubble art. Okay?
Okay.
Invariably, the number of students who fail to blow because their experience with that straw is to drink milk from it, that when they come to this activity, 50% of these students tend to drink the soapy water instead of blowing. So this is a greatest example of simple way executive function works. For example, a previously learned skill, which is sucking from a straw, needs to be inhibited when you are doing artwork where you blow bubbles into soapy water. So this ability to shift mindset in the midst of your activity is how your training or skill development happens. And so the real question is, in a daily basis, are students taking a fundamentally pre-learned skill and adapt it for some other purpose? And half of them should not be choking on that soapy water.
Soapy water, right.
So I am always curious, is in the classroom, what is this straw-like activity that students are doing, which is taking a pre-learned behavior and adapting it for newer context in a newer way and being able to show. So let's talk about what kinds of things the student is not learning in, or I'm at least not confident that the students are being taught. So the number one skill on my list, which constitute executive function that is not explicitly taught, is this ability to pay attention and monitor whether you're paying attention or not, which is also called executive attention. That means I need to pay attention, and I need to pay attention to the stuff that matters. So if a student is sitting by the window and he is looking out the window and is noticing a car go by, that student is not really distracted. He is paying attention. He's just paying attention to wrong stuff. So instead of paying attention to the teacher, instead of paying attention to all the other students, what they are doing, he's paying attention to something that doesn't matter or is irrelevant to the given moment. And so to me, is the classroom teaching happening in such a way that the student is taught to sustain attention and maintain engagement? Is the student taught to detect what's important to pay attention to? Does the student know and is taught how to shift focus from unimportant to important matter? Does student know how to continually pay attention without supervision? That means, does the student continue to do the activity or pay attention even when the teacher leaves the room? Often a big problem for many students. Does the student, and these last 2 things are the most critical part, and I feel in most report cards, the teachers are talking about these skills, but I don't believe they are being taught explicitly. And what are they? Does the student receive explicit training to avoid boredom? Because this notion of boredom is, I need to be entertained while I'm educated, is the wrong premise. And that stems from students' immaturity and not teachers failing. necessarily.
Right.
But we need to make a priority that we teach student to maintain engagement and avoid boredom. And then lastly is, does the student bring zeal or enthusiasm in learning with great focus that allows the student to go into a state of flow? So the concept of flow is discussed by a very famous researcher, Csikszentmihalyi. I think I have said it right. I may not be saying it right. So as you can see, attention really matters, but is it really taught? What do you think, Todd?
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't paying attention, Sucheta.
Great, Todd. Great. Your education has failed you.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has. No, in all seriousness, Sucheta, I can tell you explicitly, I was never taught how to pay attention. I was expected to. I can assure you of that, but it was never anything that was discussed, not even by my parents. They didn't teach me how to do that. Now, they demanded attention and respect, but I was never actually taught that. So it is fascinating to think about.
Can I tell you a quick story about
Yes.
how I was taught to pay attention?
Oh, I want to hear this.
So when I was growing up, I grew up in India. One fine day, and I was telling this to my mother the other day, and she did not recall this, but my father was an amazing teacher, I think. He didn't have any background in education, but he was a wonderful mentor. So once he felt that all of us needed to improve, but particularly, I don't know if my brothers endured this, but we had a spare bedroom and that didn't have much furniture in it. And so he would make me sit on a mat on the floor, and at the edge of the room along the wall, there would be a tiny lamp, a itty bitty tiny tea light,
Mm-hmm.
and he would light it up, and I would have to sit there focusing on that light until the light went off.
Wow.
And so when I went to college, I asked some of my friends and I said, did you ever do this? And they're like, what? I don't think anybody. And ever since I've asked this question of many people, nobody has ever experienced this. So I guess my experience was very unique.
But so how did that teach you, though?
First of all, it was extremely annoying. I felt it was completely futile and it was some random, my father's control freak behavior is what I thought. And I actually did try it and I would engage in it. And what I found is I would start by paying attention to the actually flickering light. And then soon I would be lost in my thoughts. And then I would bring it back again and try it again. And then eventually I would come to a point where I would get very annoyed because, you had to wait. This is oil lamp, so it doesn't last that long, not like a tea light, like for hours or any such thing. A tiny, tiny oil lamp. And it would go away maybe for 15 minutes or less than that even. It's ghee, which is in purified butter that it would be. And what I found is I would desperately kind of concentrate how long it's going to last. So I would try to study the wick. But it was so far away that I couldn't really see it. But I think that taught me a lot about patience and also taught me a lot about my mind wandering. But I don't know if it actually improved my attention because I didn't do it long enough.
Here's where I would respond to that and say the act of realizing, oops, I'm not paying attention and bring it back. That's the skill, right? Because we're humans. We're going to get distracted by things. And it's okay. You're not an evil person if you lose focus for a second, but recognizing and then bringing that attention back to what you're supposed to be paying attention to, that's the skill, is it not?
Oh, absolutely. And, now that I have, been in this profession for 20 years and I also have been an ardent student of contemplation, and all the research in contemplative studies is really pointing out to this, bringing your attention back to current moment and noticing that you have stopped paying attention. And the interesting thing, though, Todd, is there's a disconnect between the contemplative studies research and cognitive neuroscience research and education. So I don't feel that it's infiltrated into the classrooms as a must. I want to give you another example of attention training that I received as a young child for years. And this is something I don't think that my parents thought or anybody knew this to be an attention training exercise. But when I grew up in India, there was something called ration. I don't know how the word is pronounced here, but every family would get certain amount of grains from the government. And then you would bring it home. So imagine it's like a big sack or several sacks you would bring home. And the merchants would be such crooks that they would add. So if you brought maybe 20 pounds of rice, there would be half a pound of rocks in it. Okay, so this was not rock free. I mean, you Americans are such privileged beings that you go to grocery store and actually you buy a bag of rice and it's ready to be cooked.
All right.
I remember incessant amount of time we spent as children. You take a large plate and you pour maybe 10 cups of rice on one edge of the plate, large plate. And then you go through you skim through rice and remove the rocks manually.
Wow.
Manually.
Wow.
And we would do that as a family or as children. We would be made to do this, child labor, maybe. But I tell you, if you did not pick the rock, and if you poured this whole plate of rice into large bins where my mother would transfer the rice, it was guaranteed that you will be eating rocks.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating.
And it would be very upsetting to the whole family if there's one rock in your rice during any meals, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we did this for years. Another attention exercise I will give you. And of course, mind you, I'm giving you these examples that was part of my culture and my life experiences growing up in my household, but they were not part of classroom. Another interesting thing that I did as growing up as a child was every summer, my mom and all the neighboring ladies would make this something called papadum. And this is I don't even think there's anything in America that's comparable. So you make this dough and then you roll it and you make these thin, they look like Indian bread, but very thin.
Mm-hmm.
And then you keep it to dry on the rooftop. Okay. So you take the strong summer heat of India
Mm-hmm.
and then you have these rooftops and all the children are guarding this thing because crows would come and pick it up. So you're sitting on the rooftop
Wow.
in hot rooftop watching and making sure no crows or no birds or nobody comes and you're waving them, shushing them away. And we would play cards on top of the rooftop, watching and guarding. So there are all these kids watching and guarding their mother's preparations. And so once they dry, it takes almost 2 to 3 weeks for it to dry. Then you remove them and then stack them in these large containers and you use it throughout the year. This, I can't tell you, another wonderful way of training attention.
Mm-hmm.
It was the most boring, monotonous, annoying task that I had years and years of experience of doing. You
Amazing.
never showed up to life and said, I'm bored. There was no option.
All right.
Because downstairs, your mom was in the kitchen preparing and you were on the rooftop watching. So if you didn't do your part, all the mother's effort that she did manually would go to waste. And you can't let that happen. So there was such a social element of that regulating your attention. Does that make sense?
Makes all kinds of sense. And I didn't realize it till just this conversation, but there's a thing I do every day that I now realize is helping me train my attention. That's my meditation. Because what are you doing? When you're meditating, you lose focus. Your mind wanders. And you don't punish yourself when you do. You just say, oops, bring it back to your whatever you're focusing on. Most often it's your breathing. Well, that's similar to what we've been talking about. So,
and I want to make one more comment about this. I think meditation is such a useful tool, actually, to really bring that. So I like to use as like carrying a flashlight with you. And then the flashlight is turned off, then you can't see anything. And when you turn it on, and then you direct the flashlight to find that missing coin.
mm-hmm.
That's the way attention works. And it's a wonderful tool to kind of turn on that flashlight and direct it to the most intentional area of your need, so to speak. What fascinates me about this culture, particularly as an American, I feel that our children, I don't see this happen often, are not required to pay attention so that others benefit from their attention. When you pay attention, you become less of a burden on me. This idea is not required of our children.
Nope.
Our parents are not requiring that. So imagine meditation to me is a little bit even like you're pulling meditation out of your daily life and you meditate and then come meditated to the classroom. But imagine you pay attention because you're making teachers' job easy. Imagine if we train that as a culture. It's a requirement to sit still while teacher finds the right deck of slides. That's meditation in action.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel we are not I'm not saying again faulting anyone, but I just think we have become victims of our fast-paced life.
Yep.
And we are not, if that skill is absent, then that one student who's not paying attention or those group of 3 who are talking and become the burden for the classroom, but it's not considered as a collective cultural expectation that you sit through something patiently, even when it was not the actual teaching or learning.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just think for a minute the benefits of paying better attention, not only in the classroom, not only in the workplace, but with your relationships. So amazing stuff. Well, what other skills should we talk about that are not being taught in the classrooms?
Well, the second important skill I feel is not being taught explicitly, which is setting goals for self.
Mm-hmm.
So the teacher or parents have goals for their children, and sometimes the goals are much global than focal. And the student is implicitly engaged in goal pursuit. So, for example, if the teacher has a class planned for 30 minutes, the student is following the teacher's teaching for 30 minutes and achieving the goal that she has. But that goal may not have been ever explicitly stated or explicitly externalized for the student to recognize. So, a couple of things that need to be thought about in terms of executive function and classroom goal development is the student needs the skills and ability to learn to follow goals created by others. That's a skill. The student needs the skills and abilities to set goals for self. So if I'm a student who doesn't pay attention, my goal is to improve my attention. But if you can imagine, Todd, most often the teacher taps on the student's shoulder and say, hey, Tommy, you're not paying attention. Tommy's goal is not to pay attention. Tommy's goal is to do whatever he needs to do or in whatever way he gets things done. Mm-hmm. It's the teacher's goal is to make sure that Tommy stays on task. And that's where there's a disconnect. Another important process of goal setting is the student needs to be taught how to reconstruct the goal if the current goal is not working. Then the student needs explicit training to make a plan to achieve these goals. These are, again, vague, nebulous. And I've talked about this in the past that some goals are immediate, some goals are intermediate, and some goals are future goals. Right. And students are less likely to pursue future goals because they are mostly invisible. And final two elements of goal management to me is we must teach students how to analyze outcomes of the goals that were achieved or not achieved. And then they need to have new plans created to achieve the same goal if the goal was not achieved, or set a new goal if the goal was achieved. But can you imagine, Todd, is this happening, you think?
It's not. I mean, I look at my life and I realize I came out of school, college even, without a real good ability to set goals for myself. And it took me a good 10 to 15 years before I really figured out how to do that. So that's a serious problem.
It really is. And I think it is something we wish to see students develop and become independent with. But it also comes from a belief that sheer exposure to education will imbibe this skill into children. And that won't happen. No. That won't happen.
No.
So that brings me to the next skill set that I feel is not being taught is how to shift mental set. And so how to be flexible. So one of the important part of this is, for example, when I'm completing a task, I need to do a few things. Okay, I'm going to explain to you this way. I engage in the task, then I keep doing, then I stop, I disengage from the task, I shift my focus, then I re-engage into the same task or the new task, then I engage it again, then I stop, I disengage. So this engaging, sustaining, disengaging, re-engaging is shifting mental set. And the way to think about it is like, imagine you are driving on a highway and you are in your car, you're following a speed limit, and you come to a light and you follow all the rules of the signal. And the signal says it's orange, so you slow down. It's red, you stop. It goes green, you go again. Then you come back to red, you stop. So this ability to stay on the road, you're not getting off the road, but to abide by these rules is really what shifting your mental set means.
Okay.
And so the way it will look in the classroom is the teachers are expecting the children to, let's say, we are going to read now. And then teacher says, you're given time to do quiet reading for next 15 minutes. And invariably, there are always these 2-3 kids who actually do not want to stop reading. Even though the bell has rung, the lights are turned on, and the teacher says, now pack your bag, and now it's time to go to music. That one student who doesn't want to finish reading because he's at a juicy part of the chapter, and he's like, no, I want to read more. So it's like sitting at the green light and not going forward. Now, imagine what you're doing. There's a whole slew of cars that can't go forward either because of you not doing your job. So this is often in educational curriculum, I can say the students are often described to have problems in transitions. And this typically begins to emerge by third grade, where lots of transitions are demanded of the children and they are expected again, but the skills are not taught in engaging, disengaging, re-engaging, sustaining.
And I think, isn't part of this too is the ability to know when you should shift? Sometimes you shouldn't.
Oh, yes, such a good point. Because what if the task requires you to dive deep and you're bored and you want to shift to something more interesting, which is like taking that straw I was talking about,
Right.
and throwing paper balls at your friend. That is a way of shifting from disengaging from a boring task and engaging into an entertaining task, but not relevant to the goals.
Right.
So yes, you're absolutely right.
All right. What other skills? Problem solving sounds like one we ought to talk about.
Oh, yes. Problem solving often is described as a higher order critical thinking skill. And I know lots of educational components of curriculum actually are designed to develop problem solving skills and critical thinking skills, I would say. And the problem solving, to me, I don't have any objection whether this skill is being taught in the classroom or not. I feel that there's a robust teaching that's happening in the area of problem solving. Do you know where I feel where the rubber doesn't meet the road is problem solving for self.
Yeah.
So these are the brilliant students or bright students who can solve world's problems, but they can't solve their own problem. So for example, I am coming up with a solution that what should he have done to not get into a predicament that he did get that made him lose the war? These are the students who will come up with great suggestions for Napoleon. But they are the ones who are running in the hallways with shoes untied. So it's solving problem for self is a set of skill that is taking the lens and turning it inwards and saying, what am I not doing? And how is that interfering with my goal achievement? And that taking that knowledge set or critical thinking skills and applying to self. So when a student is able to solve problems for self, that student is good at filtering information from relevant to irrelevant and discarding the irrelevant information. This student is great at moving away from distractions to more meaningful information. This is the student who can compare and evaluate information, come up with alternatives, and ultimately a student who has great problem-solving skills is taking good decisions. So how does that look like in the classroom? This is the student who says, you know what? I am really good at test taking, but I'm terrible in homework, turning my homework in. I have 7 zeros on my homework out of 10, but my test scores are above 90. That student needs to do some problem solving for self.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or this is the student who says, I'm really great in math, but I am talking in Spanish and I am gotten in trouble in Spanish repeatedly. Now I need to solve this problem for me because it's a problem for me. Now, the major disconnect happens when the student doesn't consider that to be a problem in the first place. So it is not being taught, it is being managed behaviorally. That means teachers may be left to send an email to the parents that Johnny was talking in Spanish again, or teachers are giving a reprimand, or the teachers are even calling him out and say, stop talking. But none of those things really lead to Johnny having any concern for self. He is not considering that a problem that he needs to solve. And that's the disconnect I'm talking about.
Well, and I'm sorry to say, all you students listening to this, this skill is a lifelong skill. This is solving problems for self is something you'll deal with to your final day, right?
Yes, until you die.
Yeah. All right. Any other skills we should be teaching better in our schools?
Yes, and I think this is a particular executive function skill that is taught quite often robustly, which is organizational skills, how to create systems. The only commentary I have that most of the systems are created by the teacher. So as long as we have organized teacher creating organizational systems and students who are made to adhere to these systems, there is some development of organizational skills, such as binders or having folders or, a yellow folder for turning in homework, green folder for taking the homework home, having, some system where you put the labels and things like that. The minute the teacher stops expecting the adherence to that organizational system, the student falls apart. And there's no process that put in place where the students are asked to take the system that was developed by somebody and now create a system that works for self. So that is a tiny little tweak that I would like to see happen explicitly taught. And the other comment about the structure is planning. I think a lot of teachers or schools are pretty prompt in introducing planners, and they recommend the planners in middle school and high school. And in college, students are moving to digital planners. However, the biggest disconnect I feel is the supervision of implementation of the plans. So if I don't write a note in my planner, then I have nothing to review. And when I come home, I have no homework because I have not written it down, not that I have no homework. And so not using the planner or tools for planning effectively is separate from education. It's not part of educational learning. That means a math teacher is teaching math, history teacher is teaching history, but neither math or history teacher is teaching using a planner for managing math or managing history. And that disconnect is what makes the student inconsistent in using a planner. And then the two groups emerge. One who actually realize that, oh my God, if I don't use a planning tool, I'm not going to succeed. And one group who's unaware of the effectiveness of a planning tool and never uses it. Or that same group may actually say, I dislike planners, so I don't use it.
All right. Sucheta, any other skills that we should talk about that are not being taught in the classroom?
Yeah, I have two final skill set that I think was really relevant and important so that we can lead these students to become self-sufficient. And the first one that comes to my mind in this list is prospective memory, which is how do we teach students how to remind themselves to remember to remember. And the premise of this is to remember that I forget.
Right.
So in order for me to not forget, I must remind myself to remember to remember. So in order to remember, some things I'm remembering to be that I need to do maybe immediately, like after the class is over, which is at the end of the class, I must remember to hand in my paper. Or at the beginning of the class, I need to remember to get clarification on my project. Or I need to see the teacher for study skills class, or she has office hours at the end of the day. I need to remember at noon that I need to see her at 3. So then there's remember to remember, which is 3 weeks later, I have a science fair and I need to submit my application for it. So there's a whole lot of things that we try to accomplish that happen in the future, and we are expected to achieve them in the future, but we are not taught explicitly how to achieve them in the future by engaging in something called goal creation and rehearsal, reminding yourself to remember, and remember you forget. Unfortunately, most of these failings are described in students' report card as behavioral problems. Johnny is very smart. Only thing he needs to remember to turn in his project on time. Johnny did a great job on a test, but he has not turned in 6 homework assignments. He just forgets. Or Johnny could not go to a field trip because he did not turn in the parents' permission slip. So you're looking at the consequences of failure in prospective memory are grave, but these are considered soft skills, and these are considered something you do or you intend not to do. And these skills are not even on anyone's radar as skills to be developed intentionally. And the last part I will say that I'm, again, a big fan, and I would love to see 21st century readiness include this set of skills is self-awareness training. How do we prepare the students to know who they are as learners and thinkers? How well can a student say, I know me? I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm bad at. I need to do this so that I do not suffer from the disadvantages I suffer from things that I'm bad at. This self-awareness is a byproduct of learning or being in a learning environment, but it is not in the forefront of teaching. And I would love to see that change. My favorite question to ask an educator is, when you ask Johnny, how well did you do on this science test? And Johnny says, awesome. I am going to get 100 on this science test. And then teacher checks the paper and gives that test back, and student gets 69. Johnny has no idea why he got 69. And teacher has no idea how to make Johnny realize how he could have predicted that he is likely to get 69. That is what poor awareness does. When a child is unaware or has poor awareness of self or self-efficacy or performance accuracy, he is going into the a sunset by saying, I'm the greatest cowboy. And when he arrives at the other end, he is at the edge of the cliff and he's going to take his horse and himself off the cliff. So lack of self-awareness is incredibly costly. And we are recognizing that students need to become aware, but teacher or educators believe that simply by taking tests, working on projects, participating in the class, getting feedback, students will become self-knowledgeable, and they don't. And that's why I feel the calling of 21st century is to help develop these skills explicitly.
Well, Sucheta, listening to you go through all these skills that are not being taught in the school system, I had dozens and dozens of memories of students from my educational days and the weird, silly things that they did or didn't do that I just couldn't understand. Now I get it. It was, one, they weren't taught these skills. Two, they had executive dysfunction. I mean, I just never even realized that. So you would say, how is it possible that Johnny would do that or that Susie would do that? And now it makes all kinds of sense how prevalent this problem really is. Fascinating stuff. Thinking about that. I mean, there's different kinds of students too. I mean, who is the hardest member of a classroom to actually educate?
Yeah, so as you can see, all this culminates into the below the surface force, which is executive function, pulling the student down. And so I like to describe them as capable underachiever. So the capable underachiever is the student who has got the smarts. He has the ability to do whatever needs to be done, but he's just not doing whatever needs to be done. And so the global issues that an underachiever faces is that he's always late, he's either slow, he's not thorough, he needs lots and lots of prompting, he needs a lot of nudges to get started, nudges to stop. He whines and complains about the work or responsibilities. He is not concerned about the effects of his own behaviors on his environment, particularly the classroom as a whole. He not only is wasting his own time, he's also wasting time of other people. He is kind of less contributing to the global good. And above all, he is most inflexible and tends to miss the forest for the trees.
God, it describes so many students I knew, and maybe even me in some respects. Wow.
I doubt it.
Wow.
If you allow me to indulge, Todd,
Of course.
it's not just the student who is underachieving, but these are the things that teachers see in the classroom. I was talking to one teacher who teaches math in ninth grade, and her suggestions to a struggling student was, why don't you sit in the front so you don't get distracted? Copy the homework that's due in your agenda. She wants him to come prepared to the class. Just wanted to let you know that when you say these things to a student, you are expecting the student to affect his destiny by taking suggestions and deploying those suggestions into life. So not just knowing something, but doing what you know. And that requires executive function. But if you tell a student who's sitting in the back and is distracted to come in the front and not get distracted, if the student was not aware in the first place he was distracted, do you think he will become more aware just by sitting in the front? May or may not happen,
Right.
This teacher was also suggesting that the student needs to do the homework the day he receives the homework. So let's say if the Thursday the homework was assigned on Thursday and Friday is a day off, and the teacher, he doesn't have math on Monday, so the math is due on Tuesday, the student needs to monitor himself from Thursday night till Monday night and make sure homework happens sometimes during the time. When the student shows up and doesn't turn in the homework, the teacher's suggestion is, why don't you do the homework the same night? Great suggestion, but now student needs to monitor his evening by saying, what am I supposed to do that's due not tonight, not tomorrow, but Tuesday? And so expectation doesn't translate into behaviors. And that's where the teacher's frustration is, that I have great suggestions for him. He just doesn't do anything I tell him to do.
Well, for most of my schooling, I was that student that would wait till the Monday night to do the homework. And as I got older and more mature, and as it translated into my professional career, I got better at monitoring myself and doing assignments and works and projects on the day that I was tasked with them. So that's a skill I did ultimately develop, but not in school.
Yeah. So, so I feel that what the teachers are seeing in a struggling student, that the student is not engaged. I'm going to read out something that a teacher wrote in her comment section for a student. This is a biology teacher. She said, this student has not been engaged this semester as last semester. In the fall, he did an outstanding job on a presentation and on a classroom cell model. He was enthusiastic and actually enjoyed working with classmates. This semester, he has been argumentative with peers and consequently did not complete a project. Cooperating with peers and showing patience with them would help his performance in the class. Well, imagine that feedback came in May. The semester is over. The student did not cooperate from January till May and now is sitting on a bad grade, and the entire opportunity for self-direction was lost. But I don't think the teacher thought she had any effective tools or methods that she could deploy to get that student to change his ways as she gave feedback. So it's not that the teachers are failing to give feedback, but that's where the need is. You see what I mean?
Yep.
The need is in a very much executive function domain area, and the methodology is not effective, is what I'm noticing.
Well, so, all right, on that note then, so let's wrap up this episode with this discussion. How should we infuse educational innovation, and I suppose executive function coaching into the 21st century classroom?
$1 million question right here.
Yep.
So hand me the $1 million.
Yep.
And a drum roll, please. So I think the fundamental shift that needs to happen is anything that's implicit, make it explicit. Anything that was explicit, make it stated. Anything that's stated, make it practiced. Everything that is practiced, make it implicit.
Wow. Think about that a bit.
So that requires a little bit of thinking. So I expect copying homework from the board into your agenda is an expectation I have. It's implicit. Now let me make it explicit. So that means you tell the student to copy it. Then you make it stated. That means it's a rule in my class. Then you watch it being implemented again and again. That means now you take part of your class time giving feedback to the student, measuring his success and progress in this ability called copying homework into your planner. And now, once that practice is implemented, supervised, feedback has been given, and mastery is achieved, then it goes back to becoming implicit.
Got it. Fascinating.
But there is not one skill that we're talking about. Right. That's why it's so tedious.
Right.
So that's one fundamental training component that needs to be there. Second, if you allow me to be on my soapbox, if you allow me to get my wishes met, then I would say teach executive function as a class along with equal merit to math and science and language arts and history and Spanish and arts and theater. Teach it as an ability building process and provide that opportunity for students to become competent in this set of skills, not accidentally, but very intentionally, and not 1 year, but throughout from kindergarten till 12th grade. Then you can guarantee that student will become good at self-monitoring, self-observation, self-correcting. And finally, the feedback that student receives is always when there's a failure to meet expectations, because only then it becomes a problem, right? So there's a feedback. And so the feedback is teacher initiated. So one of the important changes that need to happen in the classroom is the teacher needs to create a system where student becomes good at asking for help and solving problems for self by becoming very deliberate about that ask on a daily basis. So a question a student needs to be coached to be asking a teacher is, what did I do poorly that you would like to see me do better? Not, Johnny, come here, you are not paying attention, make sure you pay attention tomorrow. So this student-initiated process is integral to developing competence in self-optimization. Am I making sense to you?
It makes absolute sense. And I wholeheartedly endorse your notion of executive function ought to be something that's taught. Knowing what I know now from hosting the show with you, I realize how critically important that would be, how game-changing it would be. We talked earlier on this special edition series about impact to society. Talk about a positive impact to society doing just that.
Yes, and finally, I do have, I've been working on this software that helps develop executive function. And I'm precisely trying to accomplish that. That my idea is that twice a week, students get on this software that trains the students to develop executive function and self-awareness. And the software gives them feedback regarding their level of competence, self-proficiency, and response to demands on their attention, remember skills, flexibility, problem solving, organization. And then students get to practice these skill set with the lens that you develop them through mastery and through practice. And I'm very excited that we will be down the road talking about that as well. But I think my foundational message today, I hope people will understand that 21st century students are required to adapt to demands on their ability to belong to a larger universe. And this readiness to belong to larger universe is adapting collaboratively with the demands that the larger world is asking. And our students are migrating from information age to self-management age. That's what this 21st century is all about. So what a wonderful opportunity that you and I had to talk about this. It was extremely gratifying for me to be able to say all these wonderful things that I believe in.
Oh, well, I'm grateful to you for sharing all that with us. So sadly, that's all the time we have for today. On behalf of our host, Sucheta, Kamath, and all of us at Cerebral Matters, thank you for tuning in to the Big Picture series, an intense, deep dive discussion about why executive function matters.
Thank you for listening to Full Prefrontal, exposing the mysteries of executive functions. To contact our host, Sucheta Kamath, and learn more about her work on improving executive functions, visit her website at cerebralmatters.com. That's cerebralmatters.com. Tune in next week for the next informative episode of Full Prefrontal.